If you have $2 million in a 401k, but can't touch it without a penalty, are you actually rich? Or are you just rich on paper? A 2024 report by Morningstar found that for early retirees with a 40-year time horizon, the quote-unquote safe withdrawal rate isn't 4%. It's actually closer to 3.3% to ensure that you don't run out of money. That means to generate just $100,000 of spendable income, you don't need $2.5 million. You need $3 million. The goalposts keep moving, and the accumulation game is becoming a trap that keeps us working decades longer than we need to. Today on Escape the Clock, Chris Miles is joining us to share the blueprint on how to stop focusing on net worth and start obsessing over cash flow. Stay tuned to learn how to create a forever paycheck and break the golden handcuffs forever. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, the show where we highlight strategies and approaches for achieving financial freedom and having the option not to work. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. We are told that if we just follow the rules, we'll be safe. Go to school, get the job, max out the 401k, defer your gratification for 40 years, and then you can finally live. So we do. We slave away and we pinch the pennies. We lock our money into accounts that we cannot touch without paying a penalty to the government. But what happens when you actually get to the finish line following that quote-unquote safe route? You realize that the path has a massive psychological flaw. You spent a lifetime building a mountain of cash, and now you're terrified to shovel any of it away. Even those looking to retire early by following FIRE typically bank on the Trinity Study's famous 4% rule. It tells us that we're safe if we save 25 times our cost of living and then withdraw it at 4% inflation adjusted every year. That study was based on a 30-year retirement. What about people leaving the workforce at 40 or 45? What about rising healthcare costs? What about increased life expectancy? Well, some will say withdraw 3.5% or 3%. But even that math shows that if you retire early without cash flow, you are walking a tightrope. A market crash in the first 5 years doesn't just hurt your portfolio. It destroys your safe withdrawal rate. And even worse, it could force you back to work. That's not financial freedom. That's being in a pressure cooker. Well, my guest today says he's figured out the blueprint on how to achieve a work optional life without the stress. Chris Miles is the author of the Work Optional Blueprint and the host of the Money Ripples podcast, but he calls himself the anti-financial advisor. Why? Because he realized that the traditional advice of accumulate and wait was actually a losing game. Chris retired at age 28, but not using the traditional methods, but by investing in real estate. But when the Great Recession hit, he didn't just lose market value, he lost liquidity. He found himself $1 million in debt because he was asset rich, but cash poor, and he had to rebuild everything from scratch. And this time, he didn't focus on net worth. He focused on cash flow. Chris, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Hey, appreciate having me here.
I want to go back to that specific moment that I just mentioned where you had retired at 28, which is the dream. I mean, that's really better than most people possibly imagine.
Yeah.
But by 30, you were broke. So looking back, what was the specific structural flaw in your portfolio that allowed it to collapse like that?
I think a big thing was really about when the market's great, everything's great, right? When it's not, it's not. And for me, I got to the point where I got a little overconfident. I thought, you know what, nothing could go wrong. Real estate always goes up, just like people think the stock market always goes up, right? And as a result, I got caught pretty much with my pants down. It's like, as Warren Buffett says, is when the tide rolls out, you find out who's swimming naked. Well, I found out, and now granted, even if it was just that would have been fine. But there was multiple factors hitting me at the same time. Because in 2007, I came out of retirement, started teaching people how I did what I did, right? Which is how I got out of the rat race, right? Because everybody wanted to know, they're like, okay, how are you 28 now at that point, 29 years old, and you're financially free? That seems too good to be true. Like, how is that possible? I want to know how, right? So I came out of retirement to do that. We started a brand new company, and all the people we were marketing towards were real estate flippers. So these are guys that were like right off the bat, 2007, when banks started really dry up, credit, which started about the summer of 2007, very quietly. I witnessed it firsthand because I actually went in to go do a cash out refinance of my mortgage because I thought, with all these new startup expenses, I better get liquid, which I teach people to do today. Well, when I tried to do that, I remember July of 2007, I went to the bank and said, hey, I want to do a cash out refinance on my home. And I was a mortgage broker. I thought this should be easy. And they said, ooh, you know what? Get your score up literally just 2 points. and then we'll do it next month. So August rolls around. I get my score up. I said, all right, can we get this done? They said, oh, we just changed the rules last week. If you do X, Y, and Z, we'll give you the loan. Well, long story short, September rolls around. I said, I did everything you guys asked. Can we finally get this done? They said, we're sorry. We no longer offer cash out refinances for people anymore, especially business owners. And I said, well, that's great. I've got equity in this house. I apparently have asset, I have equity and everything else, but I can't tap into it. And of course, as my business was starting to suffer, because then at the same time, those real estate investors couldn't afford to pay us anymore. Our business was suffering. We're now going negative in the hole each month. Personally, I was starting to go negative in the hole each month because now I wasn't getting paid from that work, as well as my investments stopped paying me as well. So it was like this perfect storm in the George Clooney way, where everybody dies. Spoiler alert, So that's what happened, is that I just did not have, one, I was just not prepared. I didn't have enough multiple streams of income. Oh, that's another thing too. I actually cut off some of those passive streams of income to work in that business, because one of the partners said, I want you all in, no more of this other multiple stream of income stuff, which is ironic considering we're teaching people how to get out of the rat race, right? By having multiple streams of passive income.
You're in the rat race.
I know. I put myself right back in it. Plus I wasn't liquid anymore and the values were dropping. So that's why by 2007, I realized I was in the hole, 16,000 a month. By 2008, then I realized with real estate values just dropping like a rock, by the end of 2008, I was in the hole like $1 million in debt by that point.
Wow. So many lessons in there. As I was going through your book, you really make a good case in there about the traditional path and mention how you were eventually advising your father in there, and kind of the big revelation when you finally had the opportunity to help him with his finances, to kind of break some news to him. Maybe we can go into that a little bit more first about the accumulation model and how so many people think, okay, stuff money into the accounts, don't touch it. I'm doing everything right. Talk a little bit about why you believe that focusing on building that massive nest egg for later can actually be one of the riskiest ways to retire.
Absolutely. It's always about spend nothing, save everything, save it forever, set it and forget it. And hopefully someday, with the miracle of compounding interest as the eighth wonder of the world, you'll be magically retired, right? You'll be financially free. That's what I taught. That was the Kool-Aid I drank when I was a financial advisor in the early 2000s. And then you mentioned my father. He actually just passed away last December. And so it's kind of fresh because I'm seeing what happened. You're kind of getting the what's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. So my dad, he actually reached out and he said, well, Chris, this is 2005. He said, Chris, when are you going to advise me? And so I went back to Oregon, where I grew up, and sat at that same kitchen table where he taught me spend nothing, save everything. He was very post-depression era mentality. The guy literally threw away nothing. And cleaning up his house, still to this day, I can attest, he threw away nothing. Okay. I mean, he had to keep it for spare parts just in case. This guy would not throw away food if it was unopened. It didn't matter what the pull date said. If it's unopened, it's still good. That's why I ate Cap'n Crunch for an entire year straight, and then switched to Fruity Pebbles the next year because, again, it was on a case lot sale, right? That's the kind of penny pinching saver. This guy would have made Dave Ramsey look like he was a spender. I mean, that's how bad my dad was. Long story short, I sit down with him. I look at his numbers, because the guy did pay off all of his debt. He was 100% debt free, including his house. He had saved money in his 401k plan for decades, literally. And as I look at everything, I said, Dad, here's the deal. If you try to retire today, you're going to have to die in about 5 or 6 years because you'll run out of money. And he was 61 years old at this time. And he said, okay, great, Mr. Sunshine. What do I do? How do I get out of this? I said, I don't know. You did everything right from what I teach as a financial advisor. And that's when I realized something was off. And for about a month, all I could tell him was, Dad, all I could say is work longer, save more. That's pretty much the answer for every financial advisor we give in that situation. I didn't want to put him in anything that I thought would risk, like his home equity, for example. So I just said, I don't know. Well, a month later, I'm speaking with a friend of mine, Doug. And as Doug and I are chatting, Doug, I actually trained to be a financial advisor, but then he quit financial advising in mid of 2005 to go do real estate investing. And he starts telling me, he's like, well, Chris, I've partnered with my dad, and we've now doubled his income as a professor at the local university. So wait a minute, you've only been doing this for months. That's not possible. That's too good to be true. And I start arguing that stocks are better than real estate. And he finally just stops me. He's like, Chris, how many of your clients are financially free where they don't worry about money? I said, well, even the retired ones aren't financially free. So none, I don't know. Okay, great. Good job. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free? Not the commissions earning, but actually doing these investments you've been recommending. And as I was really honest with myself and I thought about it, I said, well, this guy's been working here since the 1970s and they don't seem like they're slowing down anytime soon. So maybe none. There's your problem, Chris. Like, okay, well, give me the answer. I won't give you the answer. You just got done telling me stocks are better. I'm like, dude, I'm serious. You got me to admit I have a flaw here. Tell me. He's like, if you're really serious, go get this book by Robert Kiyosaki called Who Took My Money, which is a lesser known rich dad book. But it basically just tells you mutual funds suck.
Which they do.
And then he says, and go listen to these two real estate investors that do this radio show, AM Talk radio show here locally in Utah. And so I did. Started listening to those guys. A few months later, I had to make a choice. I said, listen, I know the truth. I can see that it's flawed. I can see that compounding interest is not the eighth wonder of the world. Because by the way, Einstein never said that about compounding interest. He actually was talking about compounding numbers, more dealing with physics, not dealing with money. But of course, financial advisors took that to be their own narrative, and that's why you hear it today. But the only place you'll find it as a legitimate quote is literally on financial advisors' websites or network marketing websites. So that's the thing, is like it's just not true. And when I realized that people, it's like what Tony Robbins says, success leaves clues, right? Well, the opposite's also true. Failure leaves clues too. And if I'm seeing like all these people, even people I inherited as clients over decades of advice from advisors, still not having a comfortable retirement, shouldn't we be questioning the system? Obviously. And by the way, isn't it kind of interesting how the only person that always wins, whether the market goes up or down, is always the advisor, because they're always going to make money, right? If the market goes up, what do they tell you to do? Buy more. Market goes down, what do they tell you to do? Buy even more, because it's on sale. So the time you should be saying, oof, maybe it's time to get out. They're like, no, buy more. You're buying on sale, right? Well, if you're such a good advisor, why don't you tell me when the market bottom hits? Then I'll just buy everything then, instead of when it's going up all the time and get more expensive. But they don't do that, right? Because again, they get paid based on assets under management. They get paid a commission whether you make money or not. That to me is just about criminal, at least unethical.
Yeah, we're going to run the risk of sounding like jaded guys right now. But I will say I would always get a legal disclosure. I'd always try to see how they were making money. None of them are financially independent. I am, because I went and started managing it kind of the way I saw I could get the returns I needed and build the type of portfolio that would give me the cash flow I needed to be able to not worry about money anymore. Which leads me into my next question, actually, because you wrote extensively about the scarcity mindset in your book. And I love that because I think that is an often overmissed piece of the equation. A lot of people think about numbers, but they don't think about mindset quite as much. And then it kind of sneaks up on you, especially people on FIRE who retire early. They knew how to sacrifice, but then when they get there, the thing that got them there, they continue doing, which is scarcity, right? Don't spend, be careful, don't over withdraw. And look, we haven't even touched cash flow. We'll get to it. But when accumulation is your strategy, even with FIRE, which is money in retirement accounts and money in brokerage accounts, you still have to pull money out. And that's the way you sustain. And there is something about the idea of taking all the time without getting. And I think that can create a difficulty. So maybe you could touch a little bit on how you see scarcity mindset, where that's coming from, and how that fear actually prevents people from actually ever being actually wealthy, even when they have money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the FIRE movement, that financially independent retire early movement, because I was in that Facebook group because I thought, hey, I did it twice, right? Obviously, I had to do it twice because I screwed up the first time. So I had to do it again by 2016, right? So I thought, of course, if I did this twice by the time I'm 40, I'm a living example. I literally got booted out of the group because I spoke too much truth to them, because they do live in a scarcity world. It wasn't what I thought it was. I imagined that FIRE group. They're literally people living in a saver paradigm. And this is the thing that you just mentioned, right? There's really three money mindsets, if I were to dumb it down. It's spender, saver, and steward. The first two are rooted in scarcity. Spenders always get the bad rap, right? I mean, a lot of them go into business because that's the thing. They don't like to track their money, at least the money going out, but they love seeing the money coming in. And so it's always a hustle mode, right? They're always trying to, hunt and kill their next meal, so to speak. And there's some good to that, but there's also some bad because the fact that they ignore the expenses, they're always in the rat race. There's never enough for them. But it's also true of the saver, who's always heralded as being like the pristine example of what you should be, the role model, right? Like the Dave Ramseys of the world and the Ramit Sethi's even. I mean, all these people saying that you just got to, spend very little, right? And I get it. Ramit Sethi says you can still spend money, but just prioritize. I gravitate to that more too, but it's still about scarcity. Like you can never be cheap enough, you can never pay off your debt fast enough, and you can never save enough in a saver mentality. And that's what my dad was. He never felt comfortable enough to really retire. He wanted to. I mean, the guy had heart attacks, strokes. I mean, the guy wanted to retire, but he just couldn't. And even if we got him financially by the numbers there, the problem is if your mindset's still rooted in that scarcity, you'll still feel like it's never enough. And so that's why you have to take the steward mentality, which takes the best of the spender and the saver and puts it into one. Because the good news about the spenders, they're willing to use money. But the problem is when they use money, it goes out, but it never comes back, right? But with savers, at least they're willing to think about it. They're willing to be wise with it in some ways. But the problem with savers, they just sit on it. They hoard it even, right? That's a problem. That doesn't work either. That's the accumulation theory. That doesn't work. Instead, by the way, accumulation theory does work for one group, and it's actually the banks and the financial institutions, right? Because the more you hoard, the more you compound and save and stay in that scarcity, then live on less than the interest, they still get paid. They get compounding income while you're trying to hopefully compound your interest, right? That's another problem. So Stewart says, how can I take the best of both worlds? How can I not just look at the money coming in, but also the money going out and look at it from a more abundant standpoint, that there's always enough. There are no limits. There's always a solution, right? It's not like there's never enough. I think of it like punctuation. It's interesting because when you're in scarcity, right? In punctuation, if you say, I can't afford this, right? That's a period. And that's definitely scarcity. Now, if you add an exclamation point, I can't afford this. Now it's really emotional. There's a heightened amount of scarcity and it's even worse. If you put a question mark and switch just two words like, how can I afford this? Now, all of a sudden, it becomes a different, more powerful question. And that's what stewards do. Stewards are just like in the Bible. They talk about the parable of the talents, right? The three servants who are given different sums of money. Two of them go out, make more with it. They get rewarded. But the one that had one sum of money, he buried it. He didn't want to lose it. He was like Dave Ramsey, right? He made sure he paid his debt back at the end. But the master said, hey, I expected you to do something with this money and you didn't. Get out of here. I'm going to take that one and give it to the guy that made 10. And that's kind of what a steward does, is how can I make things better, magnify it? How can I improve not just the amount of money, but even the purpose of the money too?
The quote unquote safe withdrawal rate is now estimated to be 3.3%. Mm-hmm. And that keeps just going down all the time. So there is no safety, I think, is how people feel when they're still in a scarcity mindset. It is kind of a place of fear, and it can really hold people from feeling independent. And the whole point of this is feeling independent. It's freeing yourself from the money, reclaiming time, really, enjoying your life. So let's get into cash flow, because I tell you, you wrote the blueprint. My book also does this, and cash flow is a huge part of what I was talking about. I mean, look, I don't believe you can achieve financial independence without cash flow. I really don't.
Absolutely.
Because I think the scarcity mindset's not mitigated in your plan. It's always going to be creeping there on you. Mm-hmm. You had something fascinating in your book, which is this idea of a cash flow index. This was great. It's my favorite part of your book. That's your cash flow index, because it really made a kind of a provocative case about why paying down a highest interest rate, like such as a credit card, might not always be the right thing to do. Because I don't know if like interest arbitrage is your main strategy, or what you're using to try to help people in the blueprint achieve getting cash flow positive. But I know there is a calculus that we all have to make. Car loan, credit card, mortgage, like which one do we pay down first? Yeah. Which do we go into this money market? Do we go into this high yield savings account? Do we go into the stock investment, or do we do a real estate investment? There's lots of decisions that people have to make. Mm-hmm. So you tried to make it easier. You gave an equation, a simple way to calculate, hey, if this number is in this range, you should start here, instead of just doing a simple, debt snowball or avalanche approach for a credit card, for instance. So can you describe the cash flow index, how it's different and how that's helping people free up more money?
Yeah, let me preface it, kind of like bridge the gap between what we just discussed to this, because it's critical. You have to have the steward mentality for it to make sense. You think like a spender, you wouldn't do it anyways. If you're a saver, you're going to have a hard time with this because you're used to the debt pay down strategies of either the debt snowball or the debt avalanche, right? One of them talks about focusing on the lower balance loan and paying that off first, while the other one talks about paying the highest interest rate first. So many people say highest interest rate. You'll hear Dave Ramsey say, go for the lowest balance. The reason he says that is because you want that psychological win. Like when you pay something off quickly, you're like, oh, I did it, right? So he kind of goes, even though he knows the numbers don't always work in his favor, he goes for that method. Now, I'll tell you something that's not in the book, okay? When I was a financial advisor, this is back in the early 2000s, we didn't have AI. We had Excel. And I had a guy in my office that we helped create this Excel spreadsheet. It was a debt pay down calculator. And it would take, depending on how many loans you had, we would put the different loans in. And sometimes it would take 5 minutes to calculate on Excel to figure out which one to pay off first. Here's what shocked me. The fastest pay down wasn't always either the highest interest rate, and it wasn't always the lowest balance. And I was shocked. I was like, sometimes I thought, well, shouldn't it be this one? I was like, no, it says pay normal payments on your credit card. Don't pay it off early. What? Like just pay your normal payments and then it'll pay off. And then you pay these other ones first. So it got me to open my mind to other options. And when I was going broke in 2007 and 2008, I was looking for answers. I had limited cash. Should I invest it or should I pay off a debt? And really what it came down to is I realized in that situation when I was over $1 million in debt, the stress wasn't the $1 million of debt. It was the monthly payments coming out of my pocket. And if you really think about it, imagine if you had a $500,000 mortgage, but your monthly payment was only $1 a month. Would you stress about it?
You'd have enough opportunity money to do other things.
Oh yeah. You'd be like, I'll pay $1 a month for the rest of my life. That's cheap, right? It's never about the balance. Even when people say, oh, my student loan's so big. Well, that's where they get thrown off. They see this big balance, but they also see this big payment. Same thing with the mortgage. And so sometimes people will do things in the opposite order. So that being said, let's go to the cash flow index. This one calculates it differently. I try to make it easier rather than calculating ROI, return on your investment of paying off the debt, and just made it into a simple index, which is take the balance of that loan and divide it by the minimum monthly payment, and you'll get the cash flow index of that loan. The lowest number you want to pay off first. So you go for the lower ones first, and then you can snowball it still, but just do it with going with the lowest index first and moving up. Now, what does that mean in real life? Imagine this. Imagine you have a $10,000 car loan. That's $500 a month. But you also have a $10,000 credit card. That's $200 a month. Now, that being said, if you knew that credit card was like at 18% interest or whatever, and the car loan was at, say, 6%, most people, financial advisors, even Dave Ramsey would say, pay off that credit card first, right? But what I've learned is the stress, again, is in the cash flow, right? Or the lack thereof in a situation. What really helps people is how do we free up that monthly cash? How do we get those payments down? By the way, even the banks, look at this. Have you ever heard them refer to debt to income ratio, which is what are your debt payments compared to your income? Banks will refuse to give you a loan, even if you have an 800 plus credit score, if your debt to income ratio is too high. Indirectly, the cash flow index, they look as the same measure of financial health. So the cash flow index on those two loans, right? 10,000 divided by the $500 car payment is 20. On the credit card, 10,000 divided by 200 is 50. If you only had 10,000 bucks, which one's going to help you feel more free? And literally, in economic sense, be more free? It's going to be paying off the car, freeing up the $500 a month, because that gives you options. When you improve your cash flow, it creates options. And when you have more options, you have more freedom. So that $500 a month is gone. And guess you can do that $500 a month, whatever you want. You could pay it towards the credit card, which will pay it off in a year anyways, where little interest is being paid. Most of the time when banks are trying to scare you, banks purposely want you to pay off loans faster. That's why they'll send you those letters saying, if you only make your minimum payment of your credit card, it'll take 13 years and 8 months. But if you pay extra, you'll pay it off in 6 years, right? They're showing you that because they want you to pay off first so that they take less risk. Believe it or not, they actually earn interest on money no matter how you pay them. They're always going to earn interest because there's always somebody to lend to. But they also know there's high risk. That's why they want you to do that 15-year mortgage versus the 30-year mortgage, because they give you the lower interest on that 15-year versus the 30-year, right? So you have to question everything. All these rules we've been taught about money have come from banks essentially, right? That's what I learned as a mortgage broker. I was telling people, pay off your mortgage faster. Well, guess what? Banks don't do that. You never see the bank call you up and say, you know what? You've had that savings account with me for the last 30 years. Although you've been a faithful client, I just listened to the Dave Ramsey show and I just found out that, oh my gosh, debt is evil. Debt is dumb. So we're going to pay off that savings, which is debt for us because we have to pay you interest for the rest of your life. No way. That interest, that's going to compound over my lifetime? Forget it. Here's your money back. No, please keep my money, in your accounts. No. We don't want to be in debt anymore. Take it back. Banks never do that. Banks are wiser stewards of their money than we are, and they teach us these rules so that we play their game. If they really wanted us to do more longer-term loans, they wouldn't make us pay a higher interest rate. They would make us pay a lower interest rate because they know with the interest over time, they would make it back. Nope. They want you to pay it back faster, which is why they incentivize you with shorter timeframes. A 3-year car loan is a lower interest rate than a 7-year car loan. A 15-year mortgage is a lower interest rate than a 30-year mortgage. That's always the case because they want you to actually do the shorter term loans. So then if anything goes wrong, they got most of their money back. They're just like an investor. So I kind of defer from this because it does kind of transition into investing as well. Because if you start thinking like a bank on the investing side of things, it makes investing easier. But when I do that cash flow index, I'm telling you, it's fun. I knew I was onto something when I had a woman who was fresh out of college and we're looking at this and we started looking at the indexes. Right. And I said, well, based on what I'm seeing here, if we pay off your car loan, this frees up $300 a month, but you got to basically pay off another $2,000. I said, here's what you can do. charge up on your credit card that $2,000 this month, build that up, charge on a credit card so that leaves the money free in your bank, and then use the money from your bank to then pay off the car. She said, Chris, are you telling me indirectly to use my credit card to pay off my car loan? And I said, yeah, because it only adds $50 to your credit card per month, but your car loan, it frees up $300 a month, freeing up a net $250 a month. She said, that sounds like crazy. And I said, it does, but it actually works. And that's why this has really become very revolutionary. And I found out as I've started to research it, I've taught this now for almost 20 years, and it's crazy. Now it's become one of the more known because there's guys like Garrett Gunderson and people like that that teach this strategy out there.
I mean, what do people think a refinance is on a home, right? It's taking a loan to pay a loan.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like the same thing, but that's what you're doing. You're borrowing again to pay off the other one at a better rate.
Yeah.
So getting that cash flow, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you have to get rid of the gunk in your life that's, compounding against you so that you can start to increase the amount of money you have left over so you can do stuff with it, like invest and get ahead. You also talk about money leaks in the book. Can you go into other places like investment fees or maybe even a 401k? I know you kind of mutual funds and things, you were kind of hard on the book, and I actually agree, but maybe you can touch on some of these. Do you advise skipping some of these things completely to also increase the amount of cash you have left over? Like how far does it go?
Yeah, there's like 7 basic strategies of how to improve cash flow. Things that we've used that help about 1,000 of our one-on-one clients free up over $300 million in the last 16 years. So it's worked. One of those is actually to stop contributing to your IRAs and 401ks. That seems counterculture in the financial world, doesn't it? And there's a reason. It doesn't mean that's always the case. And this is something you have to understand. And this is a question that my friend Doug asked me that's not in the book. He asked me, he said, Chris, and this is the first question he asked me. He says, Chris, what principles do you teach your clients? I said, what do you mean by principles? I don't know what that means. He says, that's part of the problem. And then he dropped it. Well, later, what I realized is that principles never change. Strategies, however, do change with time and circumstances. So when you hear Dave Ramsey telling you, pay off your debt, right? Don't have debt. That's not a principle. That's a strategy. Because if that were the case, he wouldn't be having ownership in a mortgage company that he keeps promoting on his radio show, right?
Yep.
That's just not the case. Obviously, he knows you're going to get a mortgage. So it's not about never using debt. He just says, try to pay it off as quick as you can. But that's a strategy, and it doesn't always work. Now, here's the real principle that he does teach that's true, is that you should produce more than you consume. Right? You should definitely produce more than you consume. That means you should have higher income than you spend, right? In dumbed down terms. Well, yeah, that's an actual eternal principle. That's even lots and lots of different strategies. And over time, that's always worked. So when I talk about the 401k or IRA, it's interesting because this is a strategy. It doesn't mean that this is always the case, but for many people, I see this happen all the time where they're saying, man, I'm in the hole each month. And when they're in the hole each month, where do you go? You charge up a credit card, right? Or you drain your savings, which is not good either, because eventually if you drain all your savings,
you got a credit card.
Then you go to the credit card. Well, why lock all your money up in that 401k prison that you can only get to if you get fired or let go from a company, which neither I recommend, right? Why would you lock your money up there when you could have that money in your power and your possession? This is why I teach about get lean, get liquid, and get out. Get lean meaning being wise steward of your money and where you're spending it. Get liquid means having cash available that you can access, not locked up in prison in like home equity or 401ks. And then get out means when you have that money liquid, then get it out into investments that pay you actual income now, not 40 years from now.
So what about the tax advantages, 401k matches, things like that, though, that's helping people optimize cash for their lives?
It's so interesting. So people will tell you there's a tax advantage to a 401k, but there's not. It's literally a tax deferral. And really what 401ks and IRAs are an income deferral. Because for example, when you get that paycheck and they take the money out before you even get your paycheck, they take the money out, put it in the 401k, they just took it out and put it in there. But when you pull that money out from your 401k, you've got to pay tax on it. Here's what's crazy. Right now, who's to say you're not in the lower tax bracket? Because right now, especially while you're aging, I shouldn't say aging. I mean, I'm 48, almost 49, right? But still, I've got kids. I've got major write-offs for having kids right now. I've also got mortgage interest because I can write off that interest. Some people have student loan interest. They can write that off too. You got all these tax deductions. Well, guess what? When you get to retirement, let's just say that you follow the plain Jane advice. You have no more kids at home, so you have no more write-offs there. You've paid off your mortgage, no write-off there, and your student loan's probably gone too, right? You have zero write-offs, and then you're pulling out income. And here's the question. Are taxes going up or down in the future based on what you see right now?
It always goes up.
Right? Well, right now we saw it go down when the Trump tax plan came into play, but that's one of the lowest tax rates we've had in just over 110-year history of having the federal income tax. So it's hard to imagine it going much lower than it is now because we've already got the national debt skyrocketing currently. How are we going to pay for that?
Yeah, trillions of dollars. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. We got to use tax dollars. So that just means we're just deferring to a later date. You don't think the government knows that? You don't think the government's literally banking on you, really pushing your money off to the future so then you can get taxed higher down the road? They are literally banking on that. So tax advantage, one, there's none of that. Now, the only good argument people have given me is the match, right? Okay, I get a match, whether it's 50%, 100%, or whatever it might be. Here's the thing. I just did a study of Fidelity specifically. I compared Fidelity's target date retirement funds, which by the way, 89% of millennials use, those target date retirement funds compared to the actual S&P 500. Did you know that over the last 10 years, the target date funds in Fidelity underperformed the stock market by 2.1%? This doesn't include that there's a minimum fee in addition to that of 0.75% coming out because it's a 401k fund. That means you're about 3% underperforming the market. Now, here's the thing, that miracle of compounding interest, right? They talk about the rule of 72 for every 72, whatever the interest rate is by 72.
Right.
That also works when things don't perform as well. If you lose 3%, that means every 24 years, you've lost half, right, of what you could have had. Well, that match, that 100% match you get, guess what it does? It just makes up for the bad performance and excessive fees that you had to pay. You would literally do just as well investing on your own in the S&P 500 index, which I'm not a big fan of, but that's just as good, if not better, than putting your money in a 401k, locking it away in prison with your employer where you can't get access to it. The government also can change the rules whenever they want to, including what age you can access it and how much you're going to have to pay and penalties and taxes and whatnot. All that's determined by the government. You're at their mercy. So when you start to factor those things in, you think, wait a minute, the funds don't do that well. Even if you get the S&P 500 index, they still have excessive fees. Even if I get the match, it just makes up for the bad performance and excessive fees. I might as well just do this on my own and take control of my finances versus being a victim to the 401k myth and fallacy that's out there.
Yeah, you touch on a lot of important stuff there. I actually touch on a lot of that in my book as well, which is the 401k itself is not giving you a lot of control. And it actually is a very profitable product also for banks and Wall Street, right? They're making good money from these. And a target date fund, for those who aren't aware of it, usually has a year associated to it. It's a glide path account. So it's automatically adjusting allocations. And I kind of think of it like almost like a set of index funds, but it's basically changing allocations over years, ideally starting a little bit more aggressive because you have time, but becoming more conservative as you glide towards the end. But they are choosing kind of like a mutual fund, like what is being invested in. So you just pick a year. That's about all the input you have. And then there's fees on top of that, which you have to take out of the return. So it's really difficult to see a lot of advantage in those types of accounts. But that's why I always say, like, if you want the match, take the match. That's fine. But as soon as you can roll that thing over, roll it over. Don't stay in that 401k ever. Roll it into a tax equivalent account that you have control over, into a traditional IRA or whatever. That way you can start getting those returns that actually help you. So, Chris, I really want to ask you, because there are probably people listening right now who are technically FI on paper or pretty close to it, but maybe they're cash flow poor, meaning maybe money is locked in assets, maybe their primary residence. So how could somebody make the shift from kind of doing maybe more of that traditional path, maybe having too much money in a 401k, for instance, which I've advised many people who are in that situation, to making the shift that you ultimately ended up making in your life? Yeah,
it's kind of interesting because I get a lot of people that when they go to our website, moneyripples.com, there's a work optional calculator. And if they find that they're asset rich and cash poor, they're shocked usually about how much passive income they could create in 12 months, right? They're almost like, wait, is that even possible? Because their financial advisor won't do it. And I'll tell you this, like, this is where the shift has to happen. Like, you have to go away from that accumulation mindset to acceleration. If I were to bridge the gap from the 401k conversation, I had a client who was 60 years old, had 400,000 saved up in his 401k. And he was just saying, you know what, but what do I do with it? And I told him, I was like, why don't you go ask your employer, usually you may not want to ask your HR benefits person. They may be clueless, but at least whoever's managing that 401k, talk to them, ask them if you can do what's called in-service distributions and see what's possible. Well, he found out that he could pull out every dollar out of that account because he's over the age of 60. He could pull every dollar out but $3,000. So he said, Chris, I've got almost $400,000 I can do something with. I said, well, here's the cool thing. This is where the strategy versus principles come in. I said, here's a cool thing. Could you contribute to it, get the match, and then pull the money back out? He said, let me ask. He asked them. They said, yeah, as long as you keep the $3,000 in there. So I said, here's what you're going to do. You're still going to contribute to your 401k, but once you get the match, pull it out. So now you literally get 100% return and you get access to that money to have in your possession. Get liquid. That's the whole point, right? And that's what many people don't realize. And by the way, he actually bought over $1 million of real estate and just massively built up his portfolio during the depths of the recession when he did that too, by the way. Now, I had another client that came in and he was the kind of what you're talking about, the asset rich, cash poor. He's like, okay, Chris, like I tried to talk to my Vanguard advisor. I'm not getting a good answer from him. I've got 1.9 million in my retirement accounts, which by the way, Fidelity stats, once again, only 1.1 million of their 45 million clients have $1 million or more in that. I mean, 45 million is a massive percentage of our country. That's why I use Fidelity as that example. They're kind of the 800-pound gorilla. Well, what's interesting, of those 1.1 million, 35% thinks it'll take a miracle to be able to retire. Why? Because they've been told by financial advisors, and you just said it earlier in the show, that you can only pull out about 3% a year if you're in your 60s. That 4% rule, here's the problem. It was taken from 1926 to 1976. He was taking the market returns during that time. But what's the problem? One, 1974, Nixon got us taken off the gold standard. Inflation became higher average after that point. Two, people live longer. And by the way, those companies that come up with that, like they literally just base it on, well, what did the Fed say the inflation is this year? I mean, they have no clue, right? So it's kind of a shot in the dark. That's why in your 60s, it's probably a 3% rule, not 4%. Although the guy that created the 4% rule, which he says was never supposed to be a rule, he now says if you invest with him, he'll make it a 5% rule.
Of course.
What a bunch of BS, right? If you're trying to do it early, it should be a 2% rule. I told that to a friend of mine and he freaked out because he's like, wait a minute, I just already saved up over $1 million. I'm 30 years old. Are you telling me I have to double this money now to be free? I said, yeah, if you legitimately want to be free, I don't want to believe it. I was like, oh, you don't have to, but I've only been doing this since you were in first grade. So I'm just saying, like, I might know a little bit about how markets work than you do, but I digress. Let me go back to this guy that had 1.9 million in his retirement accounts. He had 1.9 million there, and he had about 800,000 of equity between his real estate, like his house, and one other property, and he only had like $300 a month of cash flow coming in, right? So not enough to retire on. He wanted to retire on about 16,000 or so a month, roughly about 200,000 a year. When he asked his Vanguard advisor, he says, "What do I need to do? Can I do it yet?" He said, "I don't know." He wouldn't give him a clear answer. I told this guy, I said, listen, the reason is because either one, he has no clue, which is possible, or two, he doesn't want to tell you the answer.
Probably the second.
Probably the second, right? Because if it is a 3% rule, think about it this way. You get to save 33 times that annual income you want. Let's just even go high. Let's say you want $250,000 a year. Times that by 33, you need $8 million saved up to then live on that 3%, which gives you $240,000 a year. So you need even over, $8 million saved up to do that. And you're at 2 million, which by the way, you're already in the top percentile, right? This is why 35% of people with over $1 million feel it'll take a miracle to be able to retire, because 3% of $1 million is 30,000 a year. Well, I told him, I was like, listen, of course he's going to tell you can't do it yet. Just keep working, keep saving. And here's what he said. He said, Chris, I am 59 years old right now. He just passed the 59 and a half mark. He's like, I'm 59 and I could work until I'm 70. I just don't want to have to do that. This is why we call the book the work optional blueprint, right? You want to work because you want to, not because you have to. Right. So I told him, I said, here's the deal. You got 1.9 million there. If you just earn, this is where we go into getting that money out. You just earn 10%, which there are plenty of places in the real estate space. You can earn 10 or more percent a year as income, right? Not just as compounding interest, although they could do that too, but actually as income. And so if you earn 10% a year on 1.9 million, how much is that? 190,000 a year. Bingo. I said, you're almost there already in year one. But here's the thing. You've also got 800,000 in equity in this other rental property. What if we were to sell that, get the 800,000 out, and let's just say you made even 8% a year. Let's just say it's not even 10%. Let's just say it's 8%. That's $64,000 a year tacked onto your 190,000. And yeah, we'll take out the 3,600 a year you're currently making on that. That's like negligible, right? You're still at $253,000 in the next 12 months. He's like, are you saying I could actually do it this year? I said, yeah, you could. And if you're ever not sure you want to do a little bit more, work another year or two longer, compound that income by reinvesting that $250,000 on top of that money. And if that makes 10%, that's another $25,000 a year raise that you get the next year. Now you're at $275,000 a year. You do it again. Now you're over $300,000 a year in just 2 years. So yeah, you could do that. He's like, gosh, Chris, that just seems almost too good to be true. I'm like, it's not, it's just math. Like it's literally just math. But it seems too good to be true because no financial advisor will tell you to do this because they don't get paid commissions to tell you to invest in things like alternative investments such as real estate. They literally are only licensed to sell, not licensed to make you money, make you wealthy, licensed to sell you mutual funds. That's it. That's why to a hammer, everything looks like a little nail to them. And unfortunately, that nail just doesn't do the trick.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk on the psychological shift piece here for a moment, because look, I mean, what we're talking about here is using your human capital to make money, and you're going to save that money. But then what? Like either they're saving it to withdraw and live off of, or you're saving it potentially as capital to invest. And if you invest it in a smart way, like what you're saying is you can turn it into a new paycheck, one that you're sustaining off of instead of withdrawing money from a pile. And that has a psychological effect, right? Because a lot of reason people feel like there's golden handcuffs or holding us to work is we need the paycheck. What happens if the paycheck's not there? That's really scary. So can you talk about the psychological shift that happens when the passive income or just the cash flow is finally exceeding what you need in a month? What's that transformation?
It's big. It kind of reminds me of Dan. I actually did mention him in the book. Dan was in the military, had just graduated. He was graduated his retirement. He was 60. He was one of the top ranking colonels in the state of California in the National Guard. And then he decided he wanted to quit. He had $1 million saved up in his retirement account. His financial advisor told him, you can live on $30,000 a year. He says, I live in California. Homeless people can barely live on $30,000 a year. What else can I do? And that's where he ended up finding our Money Ripples podcast and then reached out, right? Well, what's interesting is that when we've shifted from that accumulation to then acceleration, cash flow, right, and passive income, between like some duplexes he did some oil and gas investments, like with mineral rights and things of that nature, even like apartment complexes and whatnot. The next thing you know, instead of $30,000 a year, he was now living on over $130,000 a year. He actually said on his podcast interview, $13,000 a month, but I lowered it in case like gas prices came down or whatnot. So I always say $130,000, but it really was like close to $160,000 a year, $13,000 a month he was living on. And his thing was like, hey, I'm free to do whatever I want with my time. He's like, he would actually volunteer. One of the last jobs or projects he worked on was working on like the Forest Service, right? Doing stuff with that, with like wildfires and whatnot. He was doing stuff there. And really, he had the freedom to do that. He would take his kids, and this is what I love so much about creating a ripple effect, is that he took his own kids, his kids that were in their 20s, taking them to investor events and saying, hey, this is what I've learned. You should learn it too. So he was trying to create a generational legacy beyond him.
Love that.
And just in 2025, early 2025, I got a text from his best friend. He just said, hey, I don't know if you heard or not, but Dan, who was 64 at that time, Monday night working at his desk, passed away of a heart attack and he was gone. He's like, I just want to let you know that seriously, like you made a major impact in him. Even though I know you guys would only talk every once in a while because, he was just off to the races and doing his thing. He's like, he talked about you guys all the time and how much it changed his life. And that's why I do what I do every day. Like, I don't have to. I have more than enough money. Honestly, my life would be easier not having a business like Money Ripples, But I feel like as a steward, right, you have a responsibility, where you can do something. You can just live off of it as a family, or you can do something more. How can you give back? And for me, that's why I've done my Money Ripples podcast for the last 12 years, and that was my second podcast. I keep doing this because I want to teach, I want to help people. That's why I'm here, because I want people to escape the clock as well and really be able to create that freedom that they get to work on and live life on their terms, not based on what some financial advisor says you might be able to do when you're in your 70s or 80s.
Absolutely. And thank you for doing that and coming on the show today, especially. This is such an important topic, liquidity, cash flow. It's not just a numbers thing. It's not just a money thing. It is a peace of mind that allows people to truly start to feel like they escaped that grind and can live their best life. So, Chris, how can listeners connect with you? How can they find your podcast, Money Ripples? And how can they find your book, The Work Optional Blueprint?
Yeah. Well, you find The Work Optional Blueprint on Amazon. Just look that up. It's right there by yours truly. You can also look up anything Money Ripples, whether it's at Money Ripples social media, Money Ripples podcast, or moneyripples.com.
Fantastic. Thanks again for coming on the show.
It's been such an honor. Thank you.
Chris and I both accomplished something that many dream about, creating enough cash flow to make work optional. Like me, he had a few stumbles. but his were transformative in how he now lives and teaches. He had done everything the financial industry had told him to do: invest in appreciating assets, which he mainly did with real estate. He accumulated assets stacked on assets, successfully retiring at 28. But then 2008 arrived, and what looked like a fortress turned out to be a house of cards. All that wealth he had built was inaccessible, and because of that, he ended up over $1 million in debt. Banks wouldn't give him the loan he needed, and he didn't have a contingency plan. That is where Chris Miles' real financial education began. Not that of the traditional path, but a blueprint that banks and financial institutes use for themselves rather than push on clients. What struck me about his story is how closely it mirrors the hidden danger inside so many FI plans today. The lesson in his story is that you could do everything right, yet still end up failing, at least if you take the path handed to you without questioning it. I see this often in the FI community. Sacrifice and save religiously, working towards a magic FI number. It's about hyperaccumulation, but when you need it, then you hit another phase of complexities. How you withdraw your income for that year will impact your taxes. And of course, there could be fees or penalties if you're not careful. That is too much stress for a financially, quote unquote, free life. Chris outlined 3 mindsets: the spender, the saver, and the steward. Anyone working towards financial independence is a saver. But like Chris said, the act of being a diligent saver can entrap us in a scarcity mindset. I fell into that myself, never spending on myself and therefore never really enjoying all my hard-earned rewards. But being a spender isn't the answer either. Yes, they can spend and enjoy their money, but typically they might miss the discipline needed to become independent. So a middle ground is needed, and that's where the steward came in. This path takes the saver's discipline and the spender's willingness to act, and it fuses them into something more powerful. A person who's constantly asking not just how much I can save, but how much more can I make this money do? And I actually really like the punctuation exercise he offered. That phrase, "I can't afford this," put a period on it, and it's a closed door. Put an exclamation mark on it, and it's an emotional reaction. A question mark, and suddenly it's an invitation and a thoughtful, deliberate exercise on how can I make this work. It shifts you to strategic thinking. And yes, that shift in framing is small, but the downstream effects can be enormous. We cover a lot of frameworks on this show, but I have to say Chris's Cashflow Index is one of the most practically useful tools I've come across yet. It's deceptively simple in its formula, but it can reorder how you think about freeing up cash. It makes the decision about how to eliminate debt, for instance, dead simple. And the formula that he used, it's just really taking a loan balance and dividing it by the minimum monthly payment. The lower the number you get, the higher the priority. And that might sound counterintuitive when you put it into practice, but it can work. And it's the same principle banks use when they calculate debt to income ratios. Because when you're freeing up cash, you're creating options. Plus, his blueprint is really clear. It's all really about how can I get access to the most cash quickest. He even goes as far as breaking up retirement accounts. And that can be controversial, but the argument is actually sound here. Because accounts like 401ks are anti-liquidity. The 401k locks your money away until 59 and a half. The government could change the rules whenever they want. They force you into rigid positions as well, such as target date funds, and all of these can carry fees and they can quietly erode the very compounding they promise to deliver. And by the time you reach your retirement, most of the deductions that made deferral attractive, like the mortgage interest, the kids, the student loans, those are likely gone, which leaves you left pulling from a tax-deferred account in a world where you have fewer shields against the tax bill, and let's be honest, likely higher taxes. Get lean, get liquid, get out. That is the mantra of his blueprint. So imagine a life where you need $4,000 a month, and your dividends, rental payments, interest, royalties, whatever, they're bringing in $5,000 reliably. Well, now the need for 3% versus 4% withdrawals is no longer a concern because you are making money without working. Now that is work optional. I'd love to hear from you. What is one place in your financial plan where cash is locked up that you have not thought to unlock? Email me at contact@escapetheclock.com or leave a comment wherever you listen. I'm Daniel C. Rogers. Thanks for listening and best of luck building cash flow that lasts and escaping the clock. I'll catch you next week. That's a wrap on this episode of Escape the Clock. Everything you've heard today is for educational purposes only, designed to help you think, plan, and build a stronger financial program. Take what resonates, bring it into your Escape the Clock plan, and review it with a qualified professional before making any major moves. The book, the free planner, and the one-on-one time with me are all waiting for you at escapetheclock.com. If this episode was valuable, please leave a rating, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll catch you next week.